inviting me. Thank you for coming. My name is Boris Starling. I'm an author, a screenwriter, a journalist. I live nearby. This is my 12th year at the festival, and of course, very sadly, the first year without Tanya. And it was Tanya who rang me up earlier this year. She goes, "Darling, you love dogs, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, of course." He goes, "I've got the perfect book for you. It's dogs and it's politics." And she sent it to me. And I would say that really, when she says it's a perfect book, she's slightly undersold it, because it was the perfect book for me, but it's also a very unique book. It's a very offbeat, quirky, original way into the subject in question. And it's written by John Crace, who is here with me. John is the best known as a sketch writer, political sketch writer for The Guardian, which he's been doing since 2014 as well.
Yes.
And how did that came about? That you took over from the story Simon Hogarth?
Yes, I mean it was a sort of terrifying email to get. Alan Rusbridger, who was the editor at the time, wasn't noted for his communication skills. In fact, in the entire 20 years that I've been working for The Guardian up to then, I've had precisely no emails from him. So, other than the ones that he sent as sort of global emails that sort of everyone got. And I almost deleted it without looking at it, because I just assumed that it was not really going to be for me. But then I had this, how would you feel about taking over from Simon Hogarth? And the first thought was panic, because Simon was a genius and readers loved him. I'm sure that some of you here have been reading him and loved him too. And I thought, how on earth am I ever going to live up to this? But if you're a satirist, it is the best gig in town. Or in my case, the only gig in town. Because there are four sketch writers, and given that the other three are the Telegraph, the Times, and the Daily Mail, there's only ever... So I literally have the one job that I really want, and it is the only one. So I kind of feel very privileged, and I can see why Simon wanted to carry on doing it until he died, because I kind of feel almost this. I don't want to depress you. I promise I will retire at some stage. But yeah, but when I took over, I did think this is going to be a niche job. There will be people who like me, a sort of politics nerd, and will enjoy it. But I didn't expect it to become quite so mainstream. But politics went mad. I mean, for the first year, it was just the tail end of the coalition.
Yeah.
And that felt very old school. We were all, do you remember then there was something called the Fixed Term Parliament Act? And so nobody would go around asking David Cameron, when are you going to hold the general election? Because we all went, oh, Fixed Term Parliament Act, it's got to happen in May 2015.
And no special advisors could put bets on it and then wonder why the police go, did you have inside knowledge?
Yeah. Or you could go out in the soaking rain. And that was absolutely...
It was brilliant. That was we will come to that, but as we were talking earlier in the backstage, I remember as a young journalist going to the House of Commons with a guy called Chris Moncrief, who was the Press Association's parliamentary correspondent. He was a legendary figure. He's now dead, and he has a bar named after him in the Commons, which is pretty much the most British epitaph you could possibly think of. But I remember Chris taking me into the chamber, and there was obviously no one there, and we stood between the front benches, and he said, "This is it. Not this is the cradle of democracy, but this is the place where all the stories are, because the stories come from humanity and all the foibles, vanities, how do you say, insanities, neuroses, ambition. And you are fundamentally a dramatist.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes you can't make this stuff up, though.
What do you mean sometimes?
I mean,
Most of the
I
time.
am a feeling of, I will direct you to Prime Minister's questions this week. Keir Starmer was off in COP, so it was Deputy Prime Minister's questions. And so we had David Lammy up against James Cartledge. And it was literally like watching people's dreams come to die. Because James Cartledge obviously felt that he had a kind of gotcha moment, and because yet another prisoner appeared to be accidentally released. I think the government, if it wants to get on the right side of this, should start accidentally jailing people. I mean, just sort of randomly, just sort of pick people off the street.
What, press gang style?
Yeah, press gang, just bung them in prison on the grounds that they must have done something wrong. And it'd take too long to find out what. So, and then, the Telegraph and the Mail would be able to get fully behind that.
So everyone would be happy.
And everyone would be happy. Nigel Farage would be wrong-footed. And, the Labour government would have a bit of breathing space. But no, James Cartledge had this gotcha moment, but there is one basic thing that the leader of the opposition needs to do in Prime Minister's questions, and that's to be able to count to 6. Unfortunately, James can't do that. So he kept saying, has some other asylum seeker, a sex offender, been mistakenly released? And to be fair, David Lammy was doing no better. He was sort of dying on his feet as well, because he presumably knew very well that another one had, because it was Wednesday. And, so what the bit that gets missed is that, under the Tories, 17 people were being mistakenly released every month. That's sort of one every other day, but no one really cared about it back then. It wasn't a big deal. And I think it's gone up from one every 2 days to one a day now. And, on a good day, we get 2, because we had that kind of Billy Smith bloke.
It's reassuring that some metrics are still growing.
Yeah.
That's reassuring.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. Then you get Billy Smith, a man who you can trust to do the right thing, even if you can't trust him with your credit card. He turns up at Wandsworth and asks to be put back inside because presumably he was fed up with being doorstopped by the Daily Mail or the Telegraph or someone like that and just wanted a bit of peace and quiet.
Fair
And anyway, so Lammy and Cartledge had a complete nightmare, and I'd gone into you turn up every week for Prime Minister's questions expecting some drama and theatre, and often it under-delivers. It's sort of, you have to, as a sketch writer, you have to kind of create something out of it. With this, it was just a straightforward transcription service.
But this brings us neatly on to the conceit behind the book, because Lammy against Cartledge is whatever the opposite of the Clash of the Titans is clearly that. It's
yeah.
And this book came about, you write in the acknowledgements, from the belief that your dog Hubert could have done could have done a better job of running the country than any of the incumbents in the last decades.
Well, I still stand by that, to be honest. It did seem like a good idea, and it also kind of felt that, over the last 10 years, politics had become so weird, it kind of moves at sort of warp speed on psychedelics, really. We've had sort of Brexit, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, COVID, pandemic, and Liz Truss. We'll get on to Liz Truss, I promise you. I miss her, to be honest. Rishi Sunak, and I made a huge mistake in July 2024, about 3 days after the election. I wrote, "It feels as if the grown-ups are back in charge."
Oh, that was premature.
No, and it's not, we are still in kind of disaster world, aren't we?
Yes, because for a long time, politics was very, very boring and wonkish and so on. And then it sort of became this strange world. And actually, you write very well, if I could just read a little bit from here. And I think this is maybe where some of the problems come from, because it's not just the people at the top. And you write saying about the special advisors and researchers, and you say, all the men appeared to be called Tom, Ben, or Richard. All the women, Lucy, Emma, or Camilla. Many of them looked like they were fresh out of Oxbridge or a Russell Group university at a stretch. The rest had spent a few years at a think tank or a lobbying firm. Almost no one had had what you might call an ordinary job. Everyone was looking over someone else's shoulder for someone more important to talk to. This was a place where a lot of talking got done, but not much listening. And that he's a very observant dog, Herbert, and a very articulate one as well. He lives with a guy called John in Tooting.
To be honest, he was very unhappy with me about the book.
Well, did he threaten litigation?
Yes, because he thought I'd trivialized his life.
He didn't like being seen as consulting with these second-raters in Westminster.
Yeah, he thought he was trying to do a decent job for the country, and all I could do was see the comedic possibilities.
Poor Herbert. Yeah. But I think that sense of, and you write again that the attraction to power is like a primal force running through the building, and I think, the headline acts don't come from nowhere. They are supported by this whole edifice of people, like you say, who are interchangeable, but also in it for themselves, and who, as again you say, most of them regard the thick of it as an instruction manual rather than as satire. And this is surely where some of the problems come from.
Yes, no. In my experience, no one becomes an MP because they want to be a backbencher. Everybody thinks secretly that if the country called, they would be ready. And it's not that they necessarily all see themselves as prime ministers in waiting, but certainly as ministers in waiting, and ready to do, to run a department with a budget of, even the Justice Department has a budget of about £1.5 billion. That is huge. It's been cut. If you want to know why the prisons are sort of letting everybody out, it's partly because the Tories slashed the justice budget by a third. Though obviously it's more fun just to let them out anyway, really.
And you write also about the role of PPE, that almost all these people have got PPE degrees, or certainly an extraordinary amount of, because when I was at school, PPE was quite a sort of respected degree, and you thought, oh, that looks interesting, and it certainly wasn't seen as a gateway to political life and so on. When did it change? When did this become the sort of the route in?
I don't know. It must have been around the 1990s. I don't know. I get quite chippy about PPE, which is sort of why I go on about it a lot, really, because I think that I should have done it probably. But David Cameron had PPE, didn't he? And Sorry, I get flashbacks whenever I mention David Cameron, because whenever I'm asked who is the worst Prime Minister that you've had to sketch, I kind of think back a lot, and I can't really think of anyone worse than David Cameron, because I feel like all the problems started with him. His sense of entitlement, his sense of carelessness with the country, the way he just let us slide towards a Brexit that he didn't want. Most of the country hadn't been clamouring for at the time, and he allowed the noise around the Eurosceptics to get louder and louder and louder. And he never really made a compelling case for why we should remain in the EU. All he could do was come up with, it'll be terrible if we go out. And that played into the hands of Farage, Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Dominic Cummings, because it's quite easy to fight a negative campaign like that. What he never did was say, these are the benefits. This is what the EU is going to give to us. And of course, an example, 10 days before the EU referendum, David Cameron was asked, well, what are you going to do if Vote Leave win? He said, kiss the badge. I will still be here to lead the country. 9 o'clock the day after the referendum, he was sort of, do you know what? It's all got a bit difficult.
But by the same token, I always felt that during the campaign, as someone who voted Remain, I felt that the Remain campaign were extraordinarily bad at marshalling emotion, and the Leave campaign were very, very good at marshalling the emotion, because it was an emotional campaign. Yeah. It was fought on that.
Yeah, and also, I don't think, if we're looking for kind of villains, and relitigating, it's a long way back, but I think we need to remember Jeremy Corbyn, because Labour had voted at their party conference that they were going to be a party of Remain, and Jeremy Corbyn's job was to reach out to Labour voters who wouldn't necessarily respond to a Cameron George Osborne message, and his job was to kind of rustle up the core Labour vote, Remain vote. And he just didn't do it. He gave one speech in the entire referendum campaign of about 2 months.
Which is very lukewarm as well.
Oh, yeah. It was... I suppose it's okay.
This is actually one of my favourite bits in the book is when Herbert goes to see Jeremy Corbyn to talk about the EU, and all Corbyn goes on about is the rights of the people of Palestine must be respected. and Herbert's going, well, yeah, but what about
all he really cares
about the referendum?
Yeah.
And having finally got through the apathy of Seamus Milne, even to get a meeting with Corbyn, that he was. But actually, Herbert's first job here is for Ed Miliband. And reading this reminded me of something that I think I'd probably deliberately blanked from my memory, which was the Ed Stone, which was in a whole decade of terrible political ideas that may well have been, if not the actual worst, certainly top 3.
It was extraordinary. I can remember exactly where I was at the time too.
Do you start thinking my job is now redundant when the Ed Stone comes out? How can you satirize?
Yeah. Because the news of it broke on a Sunday, and I thought I was under the impression that I would be sketching something kind of later. And round about 8:30 on Sunday morning, I got a phone call from the news desk. Turn on the television. and it was sort of like Ed Miliband and his 10 Commandments. And they
were very bland commandments.
They were very bland. We should try and be nice to each other or something. But it was also ludicrous. And he was there saying, and when I'm in Downing Street, this stone will be kind of placed in the Downing Street garden where I will see it every day to remind me of my commitment to the people. And I thought,
Just put a note on your iPhone and look at that every day.
I said, yeah, you're mad. I mean, can't you see that this is just... I'm going to rip the piss out of you.
And you're more on his side
And
than the
I was
others.
more on his side, but this just sort of, it was the most ridiculous thing.
But who sanctioned it? Did no one in the inner circle go, no, this is a terrible idea, don't
Well,
do
weirdly,
this?
we think it was Torsten Bell, who was one of his special advisors at the time.
Was he a deep cover Tory operative?
Torsten Bell is now a minister. He was elected MP last year. I can't remember before, and he's got some kind of junior ministerial role at the moment. And I mean, it's just unbelievable. He used to be head of the Resolution Foundation as well, the kind of people that were fully in favour of lifting the two-child benefit cap. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And, you know, because it would do more to raise children out of poverty than almost anything else. And now he's in the government and is trying to persuade MPs, was trying to persuade them to vote for the two-child benefit cap. And you kind of think, what happened to your beliefs? It is kind of, you do feel that sometimes it's all a bit shabby sometimes.
It was also sort of quasi-Orwellian, isn't it? It's like, you know, war is peace,
Yeah.
ignorance is knowledge, you know, and so on. What happened to the Edstone? Does anyone know? Has it been ground down or?
But I believe it was taken to a South London garage and demolished. And somebody was paid to just hit it with a hammer until literally there was only rubble and
It
dust.
sounds like outtakes from Line of Duty.
Yeah.
That's probably the best.
Yeah.
Probably the best fate for it. So after Herbert works for Miliband, and then he's called back in by Ed Llewellyn, David Cameron's chief of staff, and then Cameron goes off into the sunset. And in Cameron's place comes a prime minister you described as a human vacuum in Theresa May, because there was that extraordinary sort of Game of Thrones spin-off series where Michael Gove knifed everybody in the front and the back and was going to stand himself, and then Boris Johnson didn't stand, and then, as you say, there was Liam Fox and Stephen Crabb, who didn't get any votes. Crabb because no one knew who he was, and Fox because everybody knew who he was. Yeah. And then Andrea Leadsom said something ill-advised about being a mother, and suddenly Theresa May, rather like, you remember the speed skater who everyone else crashed at the Olympics?
Yeah.
And he won.
Yeah, it was like that. I mean, Theresa May became Prime Minister of this country by virtue of saying nothing. It was an extraordinary, brilliant campaign, really. But yeah, I can remember when she took over, I kind of thought, how am I going to sketch her? It's going to be impossible. There is nothing to her. And then I suddenly realized that she was basically a piece of 1980s faulty Amstrad software. And it all made sense. I called her the Maybot, and within 6 months or a year, her cabinet colleagues were calling her the Maybot as well. Everyone was calling her the Maybot. But it's, again, I mean, politics has been so fast forward that we kind of look back now and think, Theresa May, she wasn't so bad.
You know, now she looks like a sort of, you know, hybrid of Churchill and de Gaulle and Adenauer compared to what. I mean, do you think she was at heart a decent person, a conscientious person?
Well, I think that might be stretching it a bit, to be honest. No, I mean, don't forget, as Home Secretary, she was the woman who authorised
the hostile environment.
Those the hostile environment vans, go home immigrants sort of driving around. So I wouldn't say she was, you know, a nice person necessarily, but I think, you know, compared to what has followed, she did have some principles that she believed in. And
some commitment to public service and duty in the wider...
I mean, we never knew quite where she stood on Brexit, because she came in to Downing Street claiming that she was going to govern for the people who voted to remain as much as those who voted to leave, and then suddenly went for the hardest possible Brexit. And, you know, even those who had voted Brexit hadn't voted for the hardest possible Brexit, but it became this self-fulfilling prophecy at some point.
And she said Brexit is Brexit, which in the hands of a French Prime Minister would have been gnomic and you know, profound and deep, but here just looked like she
idiot.
She didn't. and then she gave the speech in Tuscany, which you described as Florence and the Machine.
Yes.
But do you think she was in some ways dealt a pretty rough hand? I mean, Boris Johnson, the deal he got was fundamentally the same as hers, and he just managed to sell it better, by which time everyone was so sick of it all.
I think that was more the...
But she was, to a degree, on a hiding to nothing, because she didn't have the people skills to get anything over the line. But also she had a lot of people arranged against her from the start who just weren't going to have anything to do with it. And so perhaps it was inevitable that she would come to the end that she did. And then, of course, we come on to Boris Johnson. And there's a interesting bit in the book where you say, Herbert says, that he undoubtedly had something other politicians don't have, and a sense of fun. And even for those who don't like him, and I'm sure there are many in the audience, and probably both of us on stage, don't much care for him, he does have a charisma and a sort of boosterish enthusiasm, which is quite infectious, even if you know that it's all garbage. But that did take a lot of people along with him, and he does have something that other people don't have.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I mean, Keir Starmer could undoubtedly benefit from that level of personal engagement.
Or any level of personal engagement.
Yeah. And a kind of ability to sell a vision. I mean, it always amazed me that people were so taken along with Boris, because I felt my role change a bit with Boris, actually. I kind of felt that my job almost changed from looking in the fun part of politics into being, well, if he's going to do that, then I'm going to be the serious one here.
So you become the straight man?
Yeah, almost, because I wanted to take him seriously. Because I thought that what he was doing to the country was kind of both disastrous and quite serious. And he didn't want you to look too closely at him. He wanted to sell the veneer. Boris doesn't like looking inwards. You know, he doesn't like what he sees, and nor do I, frankly. So yeah, I always felt the need to almost become his personal therapist, and, you know, try and diagnose his narcissism, his sociopathy, and his dishonesty, really. I mean, I don't think we have ever had a more dishonest Prime Minister than Boris Johnson.
No, I would agree, and you say also that, you know, you talk of the narcissism, that his sense of his need to be the centre of attention is all he really has.
Yeah,
and there is that deep solipsism that it all comes, but it's sort of like with the Wizard of Oz, that behind the projection is not very much.
Yeah, I mean, though, you know, people still, I mean, it was his. I mean, it's almost hubris, isn't it? That he was the good time. He was there for a good time. And, you know, in January 2020, he thought, I've got my Brexit deal over the line. Now I can just relax. And then 2 months later comes COVID. And then suddenly he's there for the biggest health crisis since the Spanish flu 100 years earlier. But it's also kind of, there's something about Boris, because you remember that when Boris got COVID, there was this real sense of unease in the country when he was in critical care. Kind of thought, God, he might actually die. And I can remember this sort of feeling of being dislocated. And then I remembered that at the same time, Matt Hancock had COVID, and nobody gave a toss. And I sort of felt almost sorry for Matt Hancock at that point, because he was probably kind of battling for breath himself, and everyone goes.
And the Into the Breach would have stepped Dominic Raab, who also gets a rough ride in the book. Who was? Do you think? I've often wondered this, that fundamentally there's an alternate universe where Boris Johnson became Prime Minister in 2016, got Brexit done in his own words, and then inevitably managed to mess it up somehow and got ejected from office. And Theresa May became Prime Minister during COVID, and the country would surely been better off that way around, that she would have been a better COVID Prime Minister than him.
I don't know that she would have been. I mean, I'm not sure that the country would have, her 5 p.m. briefings.
Well, there's something to be said for being sent to sleep at that time.
Yeah, it's terrible. Some of you are going to die. No, and I think we're on to Liz Truss, aren't we?
We are. Well, this is okay. You write here that every time you think things can't get worse, hold my beer.
Yeah.
That the Liz Truss phenomenon is and that was what, 44 days? I think it was 49 by the time she was done, but 44 when she said she was stepping down.
Yeah.
But 10 of those days were official mourning.
Yeah.
So to go from, that's basically a month, which is amazing, to be out in a month.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it needs to be said that she killed the Queen. No, I stand by this.
In the book, when she meets the Queen and the Queen says, "You're Prime Minister," Liz Truss replies, "Yes, it's totally amazeballs."
Yeah, because we all remember the last photo of the Queen in Balmoral, and it was where she was being, welcoming Liz Truss, and there's the picture of the two of them standing next to the fireplace, and the Queen is just looking bewildered. And I kind of think that the Queen, after that, thought, you know what? It's just not worth it anymore. When I first became Queen, Winston Churchill was my Prime Minister. I've just got rid of Boris Johnson, and now look.
Liz Truss was what, her 15th Prime Minister?
Something like that, yeah. And
there've been some shockers in that time. I mean, Anthony Eden wasn't a great Prime Minister. Alec Douglas-Home wasn't a great Prime Minister. There was, Jim Callaghan. But there was definitely a inexorable decline towards the end. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, I think we've all done something really hideous in our former lives to get the politicians like this, haven't we?
Do you think that when you said David Cameron was the worst Prime Minister, do you think he was genuinely worse than Liz Truss?
Well, I will defend Liz Truss to the end of the world, really, because I don't think we got enough of her. I mean, as a sketch writer, this is only going to come around sort of once every 2 or 3 centuries.
It's like Halley's. She's like the Halley's Comet of Prime Ministers.
Yeah, and I knew she was going to be brilliant from her first when she had made her leadership launch. It was on the first floor of a hedge fund in Westminster, and she was the clear favourite to win because she was up against Rishi Sunak, and Rishi Sunak had been perceived as the person who had stabbed Boris in the back, and Liz Truss had managed to come away from that untainted. And so the room was absolutely rammed, and there were loads of Tory politicians in the front seats, and then media were there, and various sort of Tory donors and activists at the back. And Kwasi Kwarteng was the person who was doing the introductions, and he sort of said how marvellous Liz was, and then, I give you Liz Truss, our next Prime Minister. And nothing happened. And you could see him sort of getting sweaty and confused. So he said, try it again. I give you Liz Truss, our next Prime Minister. And then there was a rattle. She couldn't open the door. And and to be fair, it's quite tricky sometimes, doors. Some open inwards, some opens outwards. Anyway, somebody let her in. She came and gave a speech, took a few questions from the media, and then tried to exit the room via the first floor window. And that's a sort of level of comic timing that...
This is on a par with that Theresa May conference speech where the letters started falling off.
Oh, that was yeah. I mean, I do count myself lucky to have been there. And also, I mean, Rishi Sunak sort of, when he gave his launching the election campaign in, I think it was the end of May in 24, and it was sort of tipping down with rain, and most people would normally reach for an umbrella.
Or do it inside.
Or do it inside. There is a number, in number 9 Downing Street, there is a fully equipped media briefing room. But no, he went outside, got absolutely drenched, and it was just a gift, because I could write, things can only get wetter.
When Truss came in, were you guys taking bets on how long she would last? Did you think, oh, she'll make it to the next election, or did you think this is a total farce?
Well, after the mini budget, it did feel like her days were numbered, but I didn't feel that it never occurred to me it was going to sort of unravel quite as fast as it did. I mean, that's almost unprecedented. I mean, we kind of look back now and think, oh, wasn't so bad. But, there was a real sense of crisis at the time. I mean, she even bought herself a few more days by sacking Kwasi Kwarteng.
On Twitter?
Yeah, because he'd been in New York and she summoned him back, and he had to find out in the back of the car from Heathrow via Twitter that he'd just been sacked. I mean, it really isn't a great advert for running a country, is it?
And we should also mention, was it the Daily Star? Because the lettuce thing was just brilliant.
Yeah, that was the Daily Star.
Yeah.
That was, yeah.
Maybe their only contribution to popular culture in the last 10 years, but the lettuce would last longer than, and it did.
And it did. I mean, though maybe if we'd also kept Liz Truss in the fridge.
But it was very. I remember that she gave an interview, and I remember watching her, and she did look rather like a hostage video where she's saying that all the right things, but she just she did not look like someone who. She looked like someone who both wanted this more than anything and actually also wanted to be out more than anything. And it was a very interesting thing, because it actually made me sort of feel not sorry for her, but it was a brief glimpse into what power does to people and the way it warps people's sense of self, I think. Because I thought, this is someone who spent so long wanting to be here, and now it's just all collapsing around her. And it was really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the weird thing, I mean, there is a sort of strange disconnect with her as well, because she now tours, various sort of right-wing TV stations, both here and in the US, and she doesn't appear to think that she did anything wrong. So I'm not quite sure how she accounts for the fact that she was forced to resign.
Doesn't she blame the blob and the deep state?
Oh, she does blame yeah. And then sort of grandly sort of says writes a book called 10 Years to Save the West from me.
And after her came Rishi, well, as you always call him in The Guardian, Rish !
Yeah, because Rish hated me. I don't know why. But he never used to, he always tried to stop me getting into his events. And which is why I called him Rish ! Because Ready for Rish, he used to have little banners up, Ready for Rish, with the last I of his name done as an exclamation mark.
That's what...
So I was just faithfully reporting, and he once tried to keep me out of his conference speech, which is unheard of, because the media are always given access, but I was told that I wasn't welcome. When I did have to point out to them in the end that it was televised, and I would be sketching it anyway, so they let me in.
And a few years before, someone had come in and given Theresa May a P45, so access is not that strictly controlled anyway.
No, and Rish started off his last ever conference speech as leader by getting his wife to introduce him, and sort of nothing says, I don't have a personality, other than getting your partner to try and do it. And his wife looked so awkward. She clearly didn't like the limelight. And she came up and said, oh, if you knew Rishi like I knew Rishi, you would like Rishi too. And after 5 minutes...
Sounds like something out of The Sound of Music.
Yeah. And after 5 minutes, she wrote, and then Rishi sort of came on stage and sort of gave her a hug and then said, marrying you was the best decision I ever made. And I thought, if I'd married the daughter of a billionaire, it would be up there in the top 3, though, wouldn't it?
But that's also an interesting thing. What do you and I'm aware that time is running on. What do you think of political spouses? But it seems to me that almost every political spouse pretty much hates it.
I would. I mean, I can't. The idea of being the plus one to a kind of politician. I mean, I think we have moved on from the days when sort of David Mellor dragged his whole family out in front of the garden gate on the morning when his affair with Antonio da Sancho. So I think, political families have wised up a bit.
But the only political spouse I can think of who actually enjoyed the role was Hillary Clinton, because it was a springboard for her own ambitions. Yeah. But pretty much everyone else, I mean, I look at Sarah Brown and just think, this is clearly a smart, nice, good person who's having to live somewhere and have her husband called all kinds of things every day. And she looked so happy when Gordon Brown left, when they left with her and the 2 boys. She looked so, and I just thought, I can see why you look so happy, because...
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that there is an element of, a feeling of delight when it goes out. Yeah. I mean, because one of the things that, since Labour have been out of, and now in off, the dynamics have changed, because obviously most of my sketches are now about Labour, but also the level of scrutiny sort of changes, because in the first 10 or 11 years that I was sketching, there was a Tory government. So I never got to see any of no close contact with Tory ministers, because they would be in their departments doing this, that and the other, and you would never see them around the Westminster estate. I mean, you would see them when they were in the House of Commons. But now it's all changed. You know, it's sort of the Labour ones who are absent, and you still see that, you know, suddenly it's the Tories running out, and that's kind of awkward, because I bumped into Chris Philp on the stairs about 2 months ago, and my heart sank. And I thought, Chris, do the decent thing. Pretend you haven't seen me. Can we just be British? And so we're passing each other, and he goes, "Hello, John." And that's the moment I knew that he knew that 2 weeks ago I'd described him as a nose in search of a bum.
Herbert would be proud of that.
Yeah.
And I'm very aware that the time's going on. We would like to have questions from the audience. So 2 very quick ones before we do. You're not here just to talk about taking the lead. Also, John's collection of his most recent work in The Guardian, Bonfire of the Insanities, a riff not only on Tom Wolfe but on Savonarola originally. And you write, "I keep thinking that surely new politics must return something like normality, a time when most of us can wake up and not have to wonder how much the world has changed for the worse, but our ruling class seem determined to prove otherwise." Do you have any hope for the future, or are you now just in an inextricable, massive, cynical despair?
I try not to be too cynical, but I am in despair. I genuinely worry that politicians, either the economy and the country is in such a state that the country is in effect ungovernable, or that, you know, governments aren't prepared to do what's necessary to do. And I do genuinely think that if things don't turn around in the next 3 years, then we could get a Nigel Farage government. I know it kind of feels incomprehensible.
It doesn't at all.
No. But I mean, it should do, because, you know, normally when Labour were elected with a 170-seat majority, the conventional wisdom was, well, they're here for 10 years at least, because they can't hemorrhage that much support within one parliament. But
Keir Starmer took that as a challenge.
yeah, yeah, and I think that partly what's happened is that the support for Labour was very shallow.
Yeah, the puddle theory,
Yes.
very deep, very wide, but very shallow.
Very wide and very shallow, and that a lot of people weren't voting Labour because they genuinely liked Labour policies. They were doing it because they were sick to death of the Tories. And I think people are still sick to death of the Tories. I mean, so, and that's why I think that sort of Nigel Farage and his sort of various sort of, I mean, who is going to be Chancellor of the Exchequer under sort of Nigel Farage? I mean, Richard Tice? I mean, the man who is in possession of a small fortune, largely because he started with a big one. And he's going to run the country.
Well, that's cheery.
Yeah.
On that very cheery bombshell,
Sorry.
let's throw it open to the audience. Any first of all, a big round of applause for John. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and Adrian will come round with a. Here we are, a lady at the front will come round with a microphone.
Hi, really enjoyed that.
Thank
Phenomenal. We needed a good laugh, didn't we? I want to ask a bit of a question, and it's about the use of flags. You know, Boris came out when he did his 5 o'clock briefings with all the Union Jacks, and that seems to be the case permanently now, that any display is that Union Jack flag. How do you feel about that now? What's your take on it, given that the far right is using that flag to marginalise and exclude so many other people. I'd just like to hear a bit of fun about it, if you possibly can.
I'm not sure I can be fun about it, but I can tell you what I think. And I mean, personally, I think it has become a kind of, it's sort of like poppies these days. There was a big thing in the, because David Lammy at Prime Minister's Questions forgot to poppy. And that became a big sort of thing. And it's almost like if you don't wear a poppy, then you can't care. And I mean, I don't feel the need to sort of, perhaps I should have had a rider and had a couple of flags up behind me for this. But I don't think that sort of displaying a flag makes you any more British one way or the other. I can see that, at football matches, it's okay. It's become, and I do feel that for some people it's become a provocation. It's a way of almost taunting people, as a way of excluding people, of saying you're not welcome. And I think it's a really complex issue. And I don't think that our politicians are dealing with it terribly well, because it's now almost become a fact that you have to have a flag behind you. I mean, Kemi Badenoch last week, it was the same day as, it was the Tuesday, the same day as Rachel Reeves was making. Rachel Reeves had 2 Union Jacks behind her. Kemi Badenoch had 4. And I think the message was meant to be that she was twice as patriotic. And it's sort of become a nonsense, I think.
Oh, brilliant listening to you today, John. Thanks very much. Everyone just talks about Farage, given especially that Kemi is not a particularly likeable person, even if you were leaning that way. What do you make of the Liberal Democrats? Have they, bearing in mind they have more seats, got any scope for, having a bigger role in the future? What's your view?
That's another very good question. There are various theories sort of going around. I mean, one is that, if you look at the polls, I mean, obviously Farage is 10 points clear of Labour. Labour are about 2 points ahead of the Tories, and the Tories are 1 or 2 points ahead of the Greens and the Lib Dems. And so on the one hand, you can see that we're kind of less possibly moving towards a more coalition type government. And there is a kind of theory that Labour, Lib Dems and the Greens could form some kind of coalition together. I think, but Labour, I know that the game that they're playing, because often that people are saying, why are you deliberately antagonising your voters on the left by tagging towards reform-like policies on immigration and all that? And there's a belief that Labour are counting on the fact that at a general election, people will hold their nose and do anything to keep Nigel Farage out. And so people who say that they are behind the Lib Dems now will take one look and see who stands the best chance in their constituency of beating reform. A bit like the way in the last general election, Labour voters went to Lib Dem, in key constituencies, so that, it was again, remove the Tories. Now the gambit has moved to defeat reform. But actually, we just don't know. This is all very untested. And I mean, I think Ed Davey has played his cards about as well as he could do. And often when he's talking in Parliament, he sounds sensible, but you don't know quite what voters are going to do come the next election.
Is it working?
Hello.
Yeah. If you can't have Liz Truss, what is your ultimate dream Prime Minister for the full enjoyment of your job?
It's sort of weird because, I mean, at the moment I would say Keir Starmer, because you always think that the new one is going to be unsketchable, and yet somehow they rise to the challenge. I can, I said, when Theresa May took over, I thought, how am I going to do this? And Boris, I felt that I would struggle with Rishi, but I didn't struggle with Rishi really, because I could construct a reality for him that kind of fitted the sketch, fitted the sort of my understanding of the narrative that the Tory party are going through at the moment. And I've quite got used to sketching the new team. Initially, when I said early on in July 24, it feels as if the grown-ups have come in, I said that with a sort of slight element of disappointment. I was pleased for the country, but worried for my job. But they have proved to be wonderfully incompetent. And I mean, even from the early days of Keir Starmer accepting those glasses and suits and Arsenal tickets, you kind of think, are you an idiot? You know that the right-wing press are going to be on your back, and if you're sticking your head, you've spent the last 2 or 3 years going on and on about Tory sleaze, especially under Boris Johnson, and how Labour would do things different. And yet here you are, I mean, maybe not on such grandiose, such a venal scale, but the principle is the same. And it just looks terrible. The sketch was and is and always will be equal opportunities. My job, is partly to entertain, but also to hold the powerful to account. And, that's what I will, as long as I'm doing it, that's what I will continue to do.
I think we've got time for one more. Listen, one more.
Good afternoon to you.
Hello.
You mentioned that we're most probably, or could be, going towards a coalition. What would the sketch writer's view be of proportional representation?
Well, I mean, personally, I'm all in favour of it. I think it's fair, but it's quite interesting now that for a long while, Nigel Farage was very, very in favour of proportional representation and was going on and on about how reform were underrepresented compared. But now that he sees that a 10-point lead, and if he can get a critical mass of 2 or 3, he seems to be stuck on 31. It's quite interesting. I mean, this is a bit kind of nerdy, but he seems to be stuck on 31, having moved through the gears up from, the teens effortlessly through the 20s. He seems to have stalled at about 31 and 32%. So it's possible, people are wondering whether maybe it's plateaued and that he has attracted all the people that he's likely to attract. But if he can somehow get a few more, he will benefit hugely from first past the post. So he's been a lot quieter about proportional representation. Interestingly, the Lib Dems have as well, because now they have 72 seats, and oddly, if you tot up what they would be, the number of seats they would have expected to get under proportional representation, it's about the same. So, you know, they haven't done so badly out of first past the post. So we're kind of learning on the job, really. I mean, I think all we can say for definite is that the old two-party hegemony is not working anymore. And, you know, we can't rely on it. And that's not to say that Labour won't necessarily win the next election. I mean, you know, they might be able to turn it round, but it does feel as if we're entering a new, more fragmented era.
I would love to keep this going, but I'm very aware of time. John will be signing books outside afterwards, and I would just like to finish by saying, at a time of national decline, one of the things the British are, and hopefully always will be, world-class at is taking the piss. And very few people do it better than Mr. John Crace. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Boris. Thank you so much.